Size isn't everything. That's not just the mantra of the poorly endowed, it's a way of life for small market teams in the NFL. Whereas the NBA and MLB thrive when their most populous cities are represented in the biggest games, the NFL has been able to make do. Pro football didn't always span the width of the continental United States. When the league was birthed in 1920, the 14 teams were stretched from Indiana to New York, and although the NFL eventually opted for larger markets, the league built its popularity in the Rust Belt and small town USA. It sounds like the plot of a Bruce Springsteen song, but it's the truth. Today we're listing the smallest markets in NFL history and their interesting stories, and that's coming up right after this. Hey, we all know the benefits of staying at home and remaining safe during literally the most bizarre time in our history. So if you're going to have food delivered to your door, why not have it be delicious? Yes, I'm talking about HelloFresh, whose 5-star recipes with their crisp ingredients will knock your taste buds out. Look at this tasty bibimbap that I had for dinner. Yo, it was legit. HelloFresh also saves you time and money by not giving you extra ingredients you don't need or going to throw in the trash. In fact, you can save up to 28% by using HelloFresh. On top of that, they are committed to giving back, having donated over 2.5 million meals to charity in 2019 and stepping up even more this year amid the crisis. And that's something I can get behind. So if you want to save time, money, eat delicious food, and give back, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code 5points80 to get $80 off across 5 boxes, including free shipping on your first box. Again, that's HelloFresh.com and use my code 5points80 and get $80 off across 5 boxes, including free shipping on your first box. HelloFresh. So we're counting down using the most recent data from 2019. These towns are home to about 100K or fewer compared to the 8.4 million in New York, 2.7 million in Chicago, and 4 million in LA. Let's get into it. Lambeau Field currently seats 73,000 fans. That's 70% of Green Bay's entire population. Despite the few residents that inhabit the small Wisconsin town, the Packers are the NFL's most storied franchise. Commonly the focus of NFL lore going back to the days of Curly Lambeau, Don Hutson, Vince Lombardi, and was home to moments like the Ice Bowl, which changed the course of NFL history. They're the smallest market in all of American sports and the only original NFL team that has never moved or changed their name, which of course came from the Indian packing company that supplied their uniforms. When the NFL was first formed, the Packers played at Hagemeister Park, which housed just a few hundred fans, a small portion of the 31,000 that resided in Green Bay at the time. The Pack won their first championship in 1929 with 11 more NFL titles and 4 Super Bowl victories to follow. Their early success endeared the Packers to fans across Wisconsin as a whole, and eventually United States. Despite being today's smallest market by a long shot, the Green Bay Packers are valued at nearly $3 billion. The Hammond Pros only lasted from 1920 to 1926, but made history by making Fritz Pollard the first African-American head coach in NFL history, all the way back in 1925. They also featured fellow players like Mayo Williams, who later became a music producer. Mayo, of course, being a staple of the Indianian diet. Hammond is home to just 80,000 people today. Their population has actually declined in the last 60 years as industry left the Rust Belt. Sadly, the pros were closer to amateurs, never putting together a winning record in their 7 years in the NFL. Still, they weren't the biggest disaster in Hammond's history. That distinction goes to the Hammond Circus train wreck of 1918. We're assuming a relative of Adam Gase was the conductor. RACINE, founded by Jacques Marquette, seemed to be southern Wisconsin's answer to Green Bay. But their team, the Legion, weren't much more than little brothers to the Packers. The Legion weren't one of the OGs, but they joined the NFL in 1922, led by quarterback Mitt Romney. Yeah, the cousin of future Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney, who was named after the Legion QB. The Legion were a slightly above average group, putting together a few winning seasons, but like their QB's descendant, couldn't hang on long term. RACINE might as well be a suburb of Milwaukee, located just 22 miles south and sits on the shore of Lake Michigan. Far from a sports city in the 21st century, RACINE is now known for its many art museums and theater companies. There's also an annual special needs prom that was once featured on This American Life. Seems like a nice place to live, Legion or not. The Decatur Staleys, who would go on to become the Chicago Bears, were a powerhouse, winning 10 games in their first season, and featured 5 future Hall of Famers, including the great George Hollis. They only lasted in Decatur for that inaugural 1920 season, moving to the Windy City a year later. Without football, Decatur isn't doing too well, listed among the 15 fastest declining cities from 2010 to 2019. Growing a bit stale, if you will. If you've ever wondered why the NFL's Hall of Fame is located in a small city in central Ohio, that's because the Canton Bulldogs were one of the original NFL teams, and home to the Hupmobile showroom where the NFL was officially formed on September 17, 1920. The NFL established the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton in 1963, since then drawing 10 million annual tourists to an otherwise unassuming Midwestern city. The Canton Bulldogs, who lasted just 8 years in the NFL, managed to win back-to-back championships in 1922 and 23, thanks in large part to Guy Chamberlain, the player-coach who blocked a punt and had a pair of pick sixes in Canton's first championship win. Unfortunately, the Bulldogs were put down after Canton could no longer fund the team in 1927. Seriously, are we not doing phrasing anymore? So the city that gave birth to our favorite sport, the one that's home to the great mecca of Gold Jackets, couldn't even make it out of the NFL's first decade. The Muncie Flyers were barely an NFL team, playing just 3 games in the small Indiana city before they became a traveling team for a few years in the mid-20s. The Flyers had to use so many frequent flyer miles due to the fact that they simply couldn't find a home field. The fans there had and still do have a lot more passion for the Ball State Cardinals. They just love the balls up there. As much as they sound like a group of third-party voters, the Rock Island Independents were a showcase for the talents of Hall of Fame running back Jim Thorpe, considered by many to be the greatest athlete of all time. Yeah, let's see him race Bo Jackson. But Thorpe turned the Indies into mainstream darlings. Unfortunately, the team's ownership made a bad bet, moving the team over to the upstart rival league, the first iteration of the American Football League in 1926. Most of the good players left for higher pay in the NFL, and when the new league folded, the NFL said no takesy-backsies and made sure the Independents were just that, all by themselves. The team from Rock Island, Illinois folded. As you might have guessed, pro football did not return to the city. They're doing okay though. Rock Island was ranked the 32nd best small town in the country back in 2015. It sounds like the earliest Pilgrim settlement, but the 20,000 strong in Portsmouth, Ohio, otherwise known as P-Town, is home to, well, a pretty bad prescription drug problem. Portsmouth used to be home to the Spartans, who joined the NFL in 1930, 10 years after its inception. They did some pretty cool stuff like playing in the first night game in NFL history against the Brooklyn Dodgers. But it turns out starting a team in the midst of an unprecedented economic depression isn't the most prudent business move, and the team had to move to Detroit in 1934, and ever since then the town has been self-medicating it. But in a way, Portsmouth, the 3rd smallest market in NFL history, still lives on in the NFL. That team that moved to Detroit became the Lions that still play today. Not well, but they play nonetheless. The 2nd smallest market in NFL history belonged to Tonawanda, New York, where their team, the Cardex, played just a single game as members of the National Football League, which earned them the distinction of the shortest-lived team in league history. Tonawanda spans just 4 square miles north of Buffalo, and they were probably embarrassed by that single game, which turned out to be a 45-0 loss to the Rochester Jeffersons in front of 2,700 fans. I guess the Cardex were not moving on up. And now for the smallest city to ever host an NFL team. How does a city of 714 residents support a professional football team? It turns out they didn't have to. The Indians, who were primarily based out of LaRue, Ohio, were actually a traveling team that didn't play any home games. Basically, the original Los Angeles Chargers. The Oorang Indians were named after the Oorang dog kennels, who sponsored the team. Unlike the Cleveland Indians, this name was a little more directly appropriated, considering the team was composed of all actual Native Americans, even headed up by Native American general manager / athlete Jim Thorpe. Man, he's everywhere. The squad, which lasted only 2 seasons in the early 20s, was known for their halftime celebrations that they brought to opposing stadiums. There were dog shows, tomahawk throwing, and even once an instance of a player wrestling a bear. As you might have guessed, they were a pretty good draw. Knowing that the team was half circus and not too committed to winning actual football games, the players were known to party extremely hard. Once showing up still drunk from the night before to a game they ended up losing by 27 to the Chicago Bears. At least they have an excuse. The Jets do not. LaRue, which doesn't feature much other than a public library, is the smallest market in NFL history and believed to be the smallest in the history of American professional sports. It was cities, if you can call it one, like LaRue that built the NFL, proving in a historical context that size does not matter. It's the ability to successfully deliver the product that does. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do not forget to check out the sponsor, HelloFresh, from the link below, and of course like and subscribe. I'm 5 Points Vids, and you made it to my next video.